Okay, these are things you want to avoid. So that's hypertension. Because when your blood pressure is persistently high, it could cause damage internally to the blood vessels. And when there's damage, it could lead to the next problem. Atherosclerosis. This one involves the development of something very fatty called plaque within the walls of the blood vessels. And this can happen anywhere. It can happen in the brain, it can happen in your heart, and when it happens in these regions, it can cause death to the regions, the cells in that area, with nutrients and oxygen not getting to the regions. If it so happens to clog up your coronary arteries, the blood vessel that is bringing nutrients to your heart, then it can result in coronary heart disease. This is a disease where many of the heart muscles die. Sufficient enough heart muscles die, your heart won't be able to contract as well as usual, and it can result in a heart attack. So take care of your body, because any one of these things could be building up within you as the days go by. And it starts off usually with this. Okay? Today we're going to look at some of the illnesses that can take place with relation to your blood. These are illnesses related to the blood. Unfortunately, these two things you cannot, it's not like this one where you can prevent. Very often these two things are related to your genes. So it's either you're born with it or you're not born with it. If you're not born with it, then okay lah. But if you're born with it, then you have to learn to manage it in your life. First and foremost is sickle cell disease. We'll watch a quick recap video for those that have not done their homework on sickle cell disease to understand better this particular disease. It affects in particular your red blood cells.
What shape are your cells? Squishy cylinders? Jagged zigzags? You probably don't think much about the bodies of these building blocks, but at the microscopic level, small changes can have huge consequences. And while some adaptations change these shapes for the better, others can spark a cascade of debilitating complications. This is the story of sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease affects the red blood cells, which transport oxygen from the lungs to all the tissues in the body. To perform this vital task, red blood cells are filled with hemoglobin proteins to carry oxygen molecules. These proteins float independently inside the red blood cell's pliable donut-like shape, keeping the cells flexible enough to accommodate even the tiniest of blood vessels. But in sickle cell disease, a single genetic mutation alters the structure of hemoglobin. After releasing oxygen to tissues, these mutated proteins lock together into rigid rows. Rods of hemoglobin cause the cell to deform into a long, pointed sickle. These red blood cells are harder and stickier and no longer flow smoothly through the blood vessels. Sickled cells snag and pile up, sometimes blocking the vessel completely. This keeps oxygen from reaching a variety of cells, causing the wide range of symptoms experienced by people with sickle cell disease. Starting when they're less than a year old, patients suffer from repeated episodes of stabbing pain in oxygen-starved tissues. The location of the clogged vessel determines the specific symptoms experienced. A blockage in the spleen, part of the immune system, puts patients at risk for dangerous infections. A pileup in the lungs can produce fevers and difficulty breathing. A clog near the eye can cause vision problems and retinal detachment. And if the obstructed vessels supply the brain, the patient could even suffer a stroke. Worse still, sickled red blood cells also don't survive very long, just 10 or 20 days, versus a healthy cell's 4 months. This short lifespan means that patients live with a constantly depleted supply of red blood cells, a condition called sickle cell anemia. Perhaps what's most surprising about this malignant mutation is that it originally evolved as a beneficial adaptation. Researchers have been able to trace the origins of the sickle cell
you know the effects of sickle cell, but I'd like to focus instead today on how we get sickle cell. You cannot spontaneously get sickle cell. People who have sickle cell will have it from birth. Okay, but now let's try to relate to a previous topic. Okay, I want to draw as many links as possible from this one to your previous ones. Will you tease out what was the main cause of sickle cell? What will end up giving that sickle cell shape? Something is different, right? It is the hemoglobin. Something is different with the hemoglobin, right? What is hemoglobin made of? It is a protein. Okay, so remember that. I always want to bring up something that is a protein, because anything that's a protein can relate back to your protein chapter. Okay, so it's a protein. Okay, so now I want to draw a link to another chapter you've learned before. My question for you, therefore, is how are proteins produced? Can you remember? Can you remember the process in which proteins are produced? Okay, so here's a clue. In order to get protein, there are actually two steps. Okay? Where you convert, or where you read your DNA to get mRNA, and then you read your mRNA to get your protein. Remember the steps? Okay, quick recap. If you cannot remember, go to your OneNote, find a chapter. You do a quick link back to another chapter. In fact, if you were to go to that particular chapter now, you will find that we have already included sickle cell over there. You see it? Okay, which chapter could you search under? Should we look like you know? Okay, have you found the chapter? Under that chapter, you should find actually sickle cell embedded in that chapter. Shamin, which chapter is this? Okay, 3.4.3. This is under the cellular organization. It's under nucleus. Okay, so under that chapter, it may not have made a lot of sense back then. We gave you a particular example, but now this is the example that we are bringing up again. There is a direct link to why people have sickle cell. If you look at a particular chapter, back then we taught you two steps that leads to protein production, right? First step from DNA to mRNA, that process is Jeanette. From DNA, how do we get mRNA? Sorry? Yeah, you got it, man. Yeah, the transcription. From mRNA to protein. Sorry? How do we get from mRNA to protein? We translate. Thank you. Okay, so you want to draw this link to that particular chapter of cellular organization. And then you search under gene mutation. Okay, and then you draw this direct link to a previous chapter. So, what results in two versions of the protein? One of them is the healthy one that you have, the other is the sickle cell version. It really depends on what happens at the DNA level. There are some people in their DNA that have a slight mutation. When we say a mutation is something where the nucleotide sequence has changed. Okay, so if you are at that particular chapter right now, you see that the real cause of this is because of a mutation. If there's a change in the DNA sequence. This occurs naturally. Yes. Okay. Is this contagious? So for example, okay, let's say it's contagious. How do you imagine it contagious? For example, COVID, if I cough in your face, then you get it, right?
Maybe like the blood transfusion and the blood goes inside.
Okay, so let's say we do a blood transfusion. Someone has sickle cell, red blood cells, and we transfuse it into you. Will you end up picking up this particular disease? And the root cause of it, if we go backwards, actually the root cause is there's something different about the person's DNA. Accepting sickle cell red blood cells into your body cannot alter your own DNA. So actually you cannot catch sickle cell. Instead, you could inherit it from a parent. Let's say if your mom or your dad has sickle cell, they could pass on their DNA to you as a baby, and then you could develop sickle cell also. So this is something that you cannot pass on to someone else like COVID. It is something that's inherited from generations to generations. That's why I say, if you don't have it, you don't have it. You're either born with it or you're born not with it. I have one friend who has sickle cell, and the outcome of it is that she feels very tired all the time. When she goes for a jog, she will feel out of breath very easily. The reason so is because while she has normal red blood cells in her body, she also has a lot of them that are sickle cell. And sickle cell red blood cells cannot carry oxygen that well. So she's often very tired. So actually that's one of the symptoms. If you find yourself very easily tired, let's say you do a very small little exercise or small little physical activity and you feel extremely tired, sometimes you may want to go for a checkup. When you go for a blood checkup, they may discover such things. When I was reading up on sickle cell, I also found out that some people were sharing their experiences of how they feel very tired, they go to the doctor, they didn't diagnose them with sickle cell. Only when she became pregnant, then they were going to have a baby, then they go for a blood checkup again, then they discover they have sickle cell. So actually it's not that hard to discover it also. Okay, so enough about the disease. I just wanted to bring up a key link to a previous chapter that you may also want to draw it for yourself. So that means I could merge these two chapters together if I want to assess your understanding. Combine cellular organization as well as circulatory system. What else could I do? I could test your understanding on the structure of hemoglobin, since after all it's a protein. So it should have a primary, secondary, tertiary structure. And actually, hemoglobin is quite unique. It goes up to the quaternary structure. So when there is a change in the DNA, you'll find that mRNA changes, the protein will also change shape. And then if you change shape, you get different version of hemoglobin. It doesn't serve quite the same function. Okay? So I could test your understanding on transcription translation, to test your understanding on protein structure, just from one example of sickle cell anemia. Sorry, sickle cell disease. The next thing we will end off with today is haemophilia. which we will take the opportunity to do a quick recap. You remember the pathway, all the chemicals involved when you injure yourself, and then there's a blood clot forming. Okay, do a quick recap. You may look through your textbook. What happens when you injure yourself at the blood vessel level? How does your body produce a blood clot, prevent yourself from losing more blood? Okay, let's do a quick recap. You are expected to know how to describe the entire blood clotting process, yeah? Okay, the story always begins with you damage your blood vessel. What happens next? There are certain key vocabulary that you want to bring into the picture when you describe this process. Ready? Yeah, so we begin a story from this. You can share with us what will happen next. Okay, first thing that may happen. Let's begin with Alpha. Huh? Okay, blood clotting is the very last step. Okay, so blood clotting. I would like to do a quick revision of everyone here. How do we get from here to blood clot? There were many chemicals along the way. There was particular CA that we did, right? All the chemicals. You must know this, huh? Okay, Alpha, I'll come back to you. Ella? Sorry? Okay, vascular spasm. Okay, so there are various things that can happen now. If you have a damaged blood vessel, three things could happen. Ella mentioned vascular spasm. Okay, vascular spasm does not lead to a blood clot, but it can reduce blood flow to the region. Okay, so that's method one. Yeah, I would still like someone and a group of us to help to recap how we can lead to a blood clot. Okay. E. Platelet plug, okay? You will need a platelet plug. Platelet plug. Okay, next few people, let's try to describe how we will lead to a blood clot. Henry, may I get your help for the first part? Okay, thank you, Henry. So, when you damage your blood vessels, one of the first things produced will be prothrombin activators will be produced. Okay, what's the function of the prothrombin activators? Ziwei? Thank you. Okay, so it activates, what will you write? Okay, activate the thrombin from, so how? Okay, so this is what you could write. You could write inactive prothrombin to become active thrombin. Okay, then what is the role of thrombin? Okay, let's find someone else. Thrombin then does something for our body. Caris? Yeah. Okay. Why you sound so uncertain? Okay, converts fibrinogen to fibrin one thing you could add, everyone, would be you convert insoluble fibrinogen become, what am I doing? A soluble fibrinogen become a insoluble one. We want this to be insoluble so it can form like a netting, so it can trap the red blood cells. Okay? All this insoluble fibrin will form a mesh that will then trap all the red blood cells to form a blood clot. Okay? So we expect you to be able to tell us what will happen if your blood vessels are damaged. Okay? Why am I recapping this at this point? Because there are some people that cannot perform this last pathway. You get a small little pinprick, you may end up bleeding non-stop. That's because these people are missing some of these activators. Okay? People that have this particular disease called haemophilia, they are missing some of the starting factors that allow the person to clot blood. Okay. People with haemophilia have problems clotting their blood because they're missing some of these starting factors. Yes? Okay, so vascular spasm and platelet clot, they can help to, so that's the thing. It's not say they cannot stop blood from leaving the body, but they just cannot clot blood. So if the damage to the body is a small one, the platelet clot may be sufficient to plug up the plates. Vascular spasm may help to reduce blood flow to the region, still okay. But if such people have a big cut, it can bleed out to death because these two may not be sufficient to prevent blood from leaving the body. Okay? So, I may ask you therefore, what will happen to people? Can you give me an example of a disease that may result from someone who cannot clot blood? Very interestingly, I think I've shared with you before, mosquitoes and leeches employ the same thing. Same idea. They actually inhibit the pathway of blood clotting so that they can constantly suck your blood. Imagine if they suck your blood halfway, then the blood starts to clot, you'll be sucking out like bubble teas, small little balls of blood clot. But instead, they can suck your blood very smoothly because they will inject their own version of an anti-blood clotting chemical. Haemophilia is also inherited by genes. You cannot pass it on to someone else by coughing into their face. Instead, it is from parent to child. So if you do not have it, it means you do not have it. Having a bad diet, not enough exercise will not lead to haemophilia. Interestingly, my wife was sharing with me because she works as a CSI agent. So she goes to crime scenes to collect DNA samples, blood samples, to find out whether this person is a criminal or not. So one of the things she shared with me, actually one of the considerations they have when they collect blood sample is that whether the person has haemophilia. Because if the person has haemophilia, cannot clot blood, then say I want blood sample from you, right? You go and prick them, right? Then they start bleeding non-stop, right? They will not be very good. Yeah. So I found it very interesting when she shared this with me yesterday. My wife is nothing like me. I don't know how she can see what she sees at a crime scene, and then come home and eat food and nothing happened. And she very funny one. She want to tell me what happened at the crime scene. Now I'm like, no, you just stop. Like, I don't want to know. Because it's very gruesome, I don't know. I really don't know how she can go there and come back home and nothing. Anyone here wants to do CSI work? If you are interested, and next time you grow up, you realize you want to be an FBI, right? Then all for today. We will now transit to the last part. Okay, so we're done with the syllabus. For now, I will not go through your past papers yet because I assume you all have not started yet. Okay, we'll only start going through next week. Okay? Currently, you were given papers from 2021, 2020, 2019. I will start by going through 2019. Yeah? Okay, actually, who has done the paper? Who has done one paper? You do 3 already, Jeanette? Oh. Who has done 2 papers? Who has done 3 papers? Okay. Okay, sorry, has anyone started on the papers? Have you started? Which one you start on? 2019. Okay, how much have you started on it? Halfway, Okay. It just occurred to me. Okay, stop recording.